Releasing one game a year since the seminal Modern Warfare hit shelves in 2007, the Call of Duty series' immensely popular multiplayer mode has given players countless weapons and gadgets to rack up kill streaks and blow away the enemy team. But with so many variations of guns, launchers, and melee weapons that have been created for every game over the years, it's no surprise that developers haven't always managed to balance each one as well as they could have. In fact, some specific weapons and loadouts became infamous for being completely overpowered. These cheap weapons made the lives of players a living hell, and in some cases, still do, with the top MVP of any given match almost guaranteed to have been using a gun that broke the unspoken gentleman's agreement that most COD players had with each other. Even if they were patched or nerfed post-released, it hasn't stopped some Call of Duty guns going down as some of the most BS weapons in gaming history. With Call of Duty Black Ops 4 on the way, myself and the king of bad takes, Mr. Josh Brown,
Infinite Warfare's good, goddammit,
thought we'd take a look back at some of the weapons favoured by the numerous people who have indeed f***ed our mothers. I'm Rich.
And I'm Josh.
From WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most overpowered weapons in Call of Duty history. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done. Number 10, the MP7, Modern Warfare 3. In just about every COD game, there's one SMG that you can carelessly run around the battlefield with, spraying and praying while raking in the kills. The MP7 was Modern Warfare 3's version of this, and while it wasn't as ridiculously overpowered as some of the other weapons in the franchise, players could still clear out a whole room of enemies by simply holding down the trigger and not letting go until everybody was dead. However, while the base version was already powerful, Modern Warfare 3's wealth of perks and attachments meant players could make the gun even more devastating. The silencer was a particularly popular choice, which combined with perks that increase movement speed, allow players to zip around the map undetected while annihilating the enemy team. Likewise, if someone had customized the MP7 to include rapid fire, you might as well have just rage quitted on the spot, because there was no way that they wouldn't make your life a living hell for the rest of the round.
Number 9, the BAL-27, Advanced Warfare. The BAL-27 was one of the first weapons you had access to in Advanced Warfare, and for most players the game never really gave them a reason to stop using it. A reliable assault rifle with a high rate of fire and little recoil. Where all the other weapons in the game had their pros and cons, the BAL was pretty much just all pros. The problem was that, thanks to the increased mobility, the lack of any substantial recoil and a steady line of fire, the gun could annihilate players from pretty much any angle. The devs were still figuring out how to balance the newly agile movement system with the accessible weapons the series relied on, meaning that deaths often felt cheaper than they would in any other game. Pretty much everyone was using this weapon when the game dropped, and it's still one of the most popular choices even after a patch lowered its efficiency if you jump back into the title today.
Number 8, the FAMAS, Black Ops. Although some would argue that the AK-74U deserved to be on this list, the FAMAS was by far the cheapest weapon in the original Black Ops. Replacing the weighty 3-round burst model found in Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops' version handled so much more smoothly and resulted in a weapon that virtually anyone could dominate with. Boasting an extreme rate of fire, the FAMAS had the range of an assault rifle and the speed and dexterity of an SMG, making it the perfect weapon in both close quarters as well as at range. Stick dual mags on alongside sleight of hand, which is what I did, and you could pretty much fire constantly, devastating the enemy. A good few months following the game's launch, the weapon was eventually patched and made less of an all-round killing machine, but it still was a formidable and popular choice, even post-nerf.
Number 7, the M16, Modern Warfare. Although the original Modern Warfare was pretty balanced when it came to its selection of weapons, there were still a couple of guns in the arsenal that were major pains for players in 2007, and still pose a problem for those playing the remastered edition of the game today. It's the M16 that caught the most ire though, with the 3-round burst weapon being the go-to for players wanting easy kills. With the stopping power perk equipped, it only took one well-aimed burst to take someone out, which didn't help the franchise's reputation as being a multiplayer game where the first person to fire always wins. The first gun that Call of Duty players took umbrage with, the M16 was viewed as the cheap option for newcomers because of just how versatile it was. God forbid if you decided to throw an underbarrel grenade launcher on there too, a devastating 1-2 combo that still causes me to wet the bed in fear.
Number 6, the OSA, Infinite Warfare. The most recent entry on this list, 2016's Infinite Warfare, featured one of the most infuriating weapons of the franchise's iconic multiplayer to date, with the OSA assault rifle making every match feel like a cheap game of who can point and click the fastest. In fact, the weapon was viewed as being so overpowered it was banned from being used in competitive tournaments, even after a patch attempted to lower its effectiveness. A pretty good game overall, God you can tell Josh wrote this list. There's no denying that the weapon selection in the title's multiplayer was left quite a bit to be desired, and the OSA was indicative of just how little thought was put into creating a diverse arsenal that encouraged players to experiment with different tactics. A lot of people fell off Infinite Warfare's multiplayer shortly after the game's release, and being constantly destroyed by lobbies full of players using this weapon was a big reason why.
Number 5. The Tactical Knife, Modern Warfare 2. It's hard to believe, but the basic melee knife attack in the original Modern Warfare was revolutionary. While most first-person shooters relied on the same rifle bash close quarters move, the inclusion of an instant kill melee attack was a subtle but major shake-up to the regular FPS formula. However, while players grew to love the knife in that original release, in Modern Warfare 2 they came to hate it almost immediately. The devs added in a perk that allowed you to nail people from a longer distance. Unfortunately, this led to hundreds of cheap deaths, as it meant that you could be hit with an instant kill from players who should have had no chance of reaching you, especially if it glitched out. Throw the tactical knife into the equation as well, which reduced the cooldown timer of the melee attack massively, and you had one of the deadliest weapons in the whole game.
Number 4. Akimbo Model 1887's Modern Warfare 2. God, you knew this one was coming. Infamously known as one of the most devastating weapons in COD history, everyone was using the Model 1887 shotguns when Modern Warfare 2 dropped back in 2009. Especially when used with the Akimbo attachment that allowed you to dual-wield guns, just about every multiplayer match devolved into players sprinting around with these dual death dealers equipped. Boasting a truly ridiculous range and a fast rate of fire thanks to the lever action reload, twirling these bad boys like you just walked off a set of Terminator 2 was all the rage back in the early days of Modern Warfare 2, and there was no avoiding these slugs if you were caught out in the open. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the gun received a pretty major nerf that reduced the amount of damage it inflicted at long range, while the shots of the Akimbo-wielded 1887s were made less accurate.
Number 3. The FAL, Black Ops 2. While on the surface the FAL, or the FAL, looked like yet another semi-automatic Call of Duty weapon that would never be used, players discovered that they could easily transform it into one of the best guns in Black Ops 2 if they used the attachment that gave it a fully automatic firing mode. It was still a slow firing rifle with that attachment added, but the punch this thing packed meant that it could easily square up against any of the more popular rapid fire guns. Maintaining its high damage per second stats that completely eclipsed any of the other assault rifles or SMGs in the game, players running with a FAL loadout quickly gained notoriety in the COD community. Consequently, because of its effectiveness, the gun was banned from official competitions for being so goddamn cheap, with Treyarch patching in a fix that made it next to useless a little while later.
Number 2, the UMP-45, Modern Warfare 2. This thing was my go-to. Not for any specific game mode, just in general. Modern Warfare 2 was definitely the entry in the franchise that featured the most imbalanced weapons at launch, but while guns like the Model 1887s were nerfed pretty quickly after the game released, other weapons continued to plague the multiplayer matches for the entirety of the sequel's shelf life. It was the UMP-45 though that became one of the most hated weapons in the whole game by hardcore players. With the SMG boasting barely any recoil despite having high damage and a rapid rate of fire, a smart UMP player could easily rack up enough kills to call in a nuke before you even knew what was happening. Especially when silenced, the weapon was a force to be reckoned with, becoming a silent death machine that hardcore mode players in particular came to hate with a passion.
Number 1. The MP40, World at War. While all the other weapons on this list so far are bullshit in their own ways, none of them hold a candle to the MP40. Debuting in World at War's multiplayer, the submachine gun rendered every other weapon in the arsenal moot, as its high stopping power and ridiculous rate of fire beat just about anything. It didn't help either that other players could be running around with semi-auto rifles, which required at least a little bit of skill to track an enemy and get a pin on them. This spray and pray gun, on the other hand, didn't require any such dexterity, being effective even if you were playing with one hand tied behind your back. There was no aiming required here, just point the shooty bit in the general direction of an enemy and watch as they explode into a mass of blood and viscera. I know I did.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. Aren't you a star? Don't forget to subscribe below, and also the people who made this video, they're right here, so go and follow them and give them some love. If you want to see more content, there's probably some stuff flowing up above my head. Why not check it out? It could be fun. I'm not your dad.